It wasn't amplifying, but now it is. Thanks a lot. Test one, two, three.
Subcommittee will come to order. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you. And here we are here today to discuss VA's management of disability exams. We will also have the opportunity to hear from our Office of Inspector General and Government Accountability Office about their work and recommendations on this matter. VA disability exams are crucial to ensuring the veterans receive accurate decisions on their disability claims. They are an important piece of the veterans disability claim file and a step towards ensuring that veterans can receive their earned benefits. Congress first granted the VA the authority to contract disability exams out in 1996, and the program has grown exponentially since. This freed up many of our VHA providers who were previously conducting disability exams to focus on patient care. The contractors are now responsible for roughly 90% of the disability exams veterans receive. Because of this, it is important that the VBA is conducting proper oversight of the contract medical exam program. Veterans deserve timely and high-quality decisions. From the first step of writing the contracts to issuing guidance to the contractors, to providing training, to holding the companies accountable for errors, this responsibility starts at the top. In 2018 report, GAO found that only one contractor was meeting the VA target accuracy rating. As of today, VA reported that overall quality has been trending up for the past 6 quarters, and the overall quality score is 90%. Job well done. And thank you. As a veteran, thank you. Additionally, almost all of the vendors across all 4 regions have showed sustained and improved, in some instances, quality percentages from the first to second quarter of this fiscal year. VA has made strides in the past 5 years with this program to ensure that vendors are meeting their accuracy requirements and are holding them accountable if they don't. Veteran satisfaction and vendor quality both remain satisfactory. However, the production percentages for all vendors are seemingly not meeting contractual requirements. I am interested to see how VA is going to address this issue and what steps are being taken to rectify the issue. VA has made strides to implement the recommendations from the GAO and the OIG, but there's always room for improvement, especially with programs of this magnitude. That being said, more veterans have been applying for benefits since the passage of the PACT Act. Exams, scheduling requests are up 30% so far, and of these, 39% are connected to the PACT Act itself. VA must exercise effective oversight as the number of exams rise. I am looking forward to hearing from the GAO and the OIG on their relevant work, as well as updates from VA on how they are implementing their recommendations. I want to thank everyone again for being here today, and I'm looking forward to a fruitful conversations. With that, I yield to the Ranking Member Pappas for our opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairman Luttrell, and good morning, everyone. It's great to have you joining us for today's hearing on compensation and pension exams at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Since this subcommittee's last hearing on C&P exams, VA appears to have made some progress, but I'm concerned that there may be lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the passage of the PACT Act last year is certainly already showing up in the backlog of exams. The C&P exam is a critical step in the disability claims process. C&P exam findings are frequently used to decide whether VA will grant a veteran disability benefits. Ensuring these exams are conducted accurately and in a timely manner is critical to ensuring that veterans have a streamlined and reliable process so they can receive their deserved benefits as soon as possible. In our last hearing on C&P exams, VA indicated that its goal was to get the inventory of pending exam requests down from the 350,000 they were seeing at the time to a working level of about 140,000. Now, the latest data we've received indicates that the number of pending exams is still over 300,000. At the same time, we're aware that contract exam providers are still conducting over 90% of the exams, and this underscores the need for congressional oversight to ensure that veterans are satisfied and that taxpayer dollars are not being wasted. Now, I hear from veterans all the time. I hear countless stories, actually, of veterans who've had abysmal experiences trying to schedule an examination with VA contractors. One veteran in my district said that a contractor simply told him that he needs to show up for an appointment on August 30th, provided no additional information or location for the appointment, and it took a conference call between our office and the contractor to get to the bottom of this and get the veteran the information that they needed. And this kind of experience is just unsatisfactory. We also need to hear today from VA's witnesses about a solid plan for how they intend to get the number of pending exams down, utilizing all resources at VA's disposal, including contract providers and VHA providers. The timeliness of these exams is also a major contributor to VA's claims backlog, claims that have been pending for more than 125 days. Data the committee has received from VA shows that the claims backlog has risen from 77,000 at the beginning of the pandemic to over 250,000 as of last week, which is almost a third of the 871,000 claims currently being processed by VA. The committee has heard from VA that VHA and the contract exam providers have capitalized on the lessons learned from the pandemic and are maximizing the use of telehealth technology where appropriate. This is mostly used in mental health exams, but I imagine that it's far more convenient for the veterans than having to drive dozens or even hundreds of miles for an appointment. I hope that VA continues to research ways to maximize the use of teletechnology to facilitate exams for veterans where possible. While the growing number of pending exams is a major concern, we must also talk about the quality of these exams. Recent reports from the Government Accountability Office and the VA Office of Inspector General have raised some concerns about how VA assesses the quality of exams and what is done once exams are deemed inaccurate. I'm also incredibly concerned that decisions are being made about veterans' benefits before those exams' quality are checked by VA. What happens if the exam leads a rating official to grant benefits inappropriately? Many veterans cannot afford to have benefits clawed back after the fact. So we need to have confidence that when a rating decision is made, it is made using complete and accurate medical information. I hope to hear how VA is guaranteeing that the exams used to decide benefits are complete and accurate. This subcommittee has a long history of oversight of the C&P exam process. This isn't the first conversation that we've had about the quality of exams. We've heard that VA has taken appropriate steps to improve oversight, but I hope to hear from GAO and OIG whether they agree with VA's assessment of its oversight. A part of this conversation that I really don't want to get lost in this is that the process is meant to help veterans. As I've already made clear, I've heard stories from veterans about how the C&P exam process can be inconvenient, cumbersome, and inaccessible for some veterans. One veteran in my district in New Hampshire talked about getting an appointment scheduled for him more than 5 states away in Illinois. And there are cascading effects from contractors not communicating well with veterans in a transparent and timely manner. Another constituent of mine submitted a claim but didn't receive a response for 2.5 months. Upon submitting an inquiry on his behalf, VA responded that while they received his claim, the contractor stated they couldn't schedule the examination and therefore the request was canceled. All this can be incredibly frustrating to our veterans, and what the contractor failed to add in that particular case is that there was a scheduling conflict with the date proposed. The contractor's customer service representative didn't even offer him the option to reschedule that appointment. So expecting a veteran to navigate this confusing process or even travel halfway across the country is just ridiculous, and I expect better of VA and contractors in providing these exams. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. I would like to welcome all of our witnesses before the committee. Our first witness is Mr. Jeff London, who is the Executive Director of the Medical Disability Exams Office at the Veterans Benefits Administration. He is accompanied by Ms. Jacqueline Imboden, the Assistant Director of Procedures and Interagency for Compensation Service at the Veterans Benefits Administration. We have Mr. Christopher Parker, the Associated Executive Director for the Office of Acquisitions of Logistics and Construction, and Dr. Henry Bridges, the Senior Medical Officer for the Office of Disability and Medical Assessment. We also have Ms. Elizabeth Curta, Director of Education, Workforce, and Income Security at the Government Accountability Office. And finally, Mr. Stephen Bracci, Director of the Claims and Medical Exams Inspections Divisions for the Office of Audits and Evaluations at the Office of Inspector General. And that is a mouthful. Would you all please rise to be sworn in? Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Be seated. Thank you for being here today, Mr. London. You are now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your opening statement.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Luttrell, Ranking Member Pappas, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. We appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the disability examinations administered by the Department of Veterans Affairs. I'm joined by Jacqueline Imboden from Compensation Service, Dr. Henry E. Bridges Jr. from the VHA Office of Disability and Medical Assessment, and Christopher Parker from the VA Office of Acquisitions, Logistics, and Construction. Mr. Chairman, I want to highlight the collaboration with VHA, OIG, and GAO in the overall improvements of the exam oversight process. We have made great strides this fiscal year with exam vendors completing over 1.9 million appointments consisting of over 200,000 acceptable clinical evidence, or ACE exams, and over 160 tele-CMP appointments, a 5% increase over fiscal year 2022. VHA also continues to support virtual care modalities by nearly 26% of exams completed by VHA this year using ACE and the tele-CMP or telehealth processes, a 3% increase from fiscal year 22. VA welcomes the oversight of VA OIG, GAO, to improve services for veterans and has worked closely with both entities to resolve outstanding issues related to VA medical exams. For example, as a result of the GAO report on license portability, VBA updated guidance and contractual language, removing ambiguity, and established procedures and additional audits to address those concerns. GAO also issued a report identifying potential risks regarding exam quality and capacity. VBA is working collaboratively with VHA to execute a comprehensive workload allocation plan for CMP exams, including an assessment of the PACT Act on exam capacity. VA OIG found that VA needed to implement a process to monitor and assess vendors' compliance with contractual mileage and reimbursement requirements. In March of 2023, we expanded oversight activities by modifying our third-party financial audit contract. OIG further examined VA's governance and accountability for exams, as well as VBA's disability exam inventory during the COVID-19 pandemic. Based on a collaboration between OIG and VBA, all actions have been completed and both reports were closed as fully implemented. Along with GAO and OIG and GAO, VBA consistently monitors quality, customer satisfaction, timeliness, and production. VA conducts regular site visits and desk reviews with contractors to ensure provider locations are in compliance with VA standards and the contract. So far in fiscal year 2023, VBA has conducted over 200 in-person site visits at exam locations. All contract and VHA examiners must be certified and undergo the same existing training prior to conducting any disability exam. We also have third-party contracts that include invoice validation and verification of examiners' credentials, licensing, and training. Internally, VBA performs monthly quality reviews of DBQs completed by exam vendors reviewing for accuracy and completeness. We also conduct special reviews and share feedback on specific exam types, providers, or based on error trends. The overall quality score for the contract program in fiscal year to date is 96.8%, and I'm happy to report that the last quarter that we assessed is 97%. VA vendors continue to expand their provider networks and their internal workforce to increase exam production. Vendors are eligible for both positive and negative monetary incentives for scores in customer satisfaction, quality, timeliness, and production. These incentives and increased vendor-provider networks have resulted in a nearly 25% completion increase this fiscal year. We are also working to meet all veterans, including rural veterans, where they are rather than where we are located. A few examples include alternative modalities such as ACE and tele-CMP, which limit travel for in-person exams. We are using traveling examiners, mobile units, claims clinics, and per diem or rented locations to assist all veteran populations. VA remains committed to the continuous improvement of medical disability exams and appreciates the oversight and authority provided by Congress in support of veterans, their families, caregivers, and survivors. This concludes my testimony. I would be happy to answer any questions you or the subcommittee's members have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. London. The written statement for Mr. London will be entered into the hearing record. Ms. Curta, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Luttrell, Ranking Member Pappas, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to discuss our work on VA's disability medical exam program, including VA's capacity to meet the growing need for disability exams. VA performs over 1 million disability exams per year, and its workload is projected to grow significantly. At the same time, VA's exam request backlog has almost doubled from about 158,000 at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic to just over 300,000 last month. Today, I will discuss VA's efforts to implement our prior recommendation on planning for exam workloads across VBA and VHA examiners. I will also discuss findings from our June 2023 report on VHA's recruitment and retention efforts, as well as VA's use of license portability and telehealth flexibilities. In 2021, we found that while VA was shifting most of its workload from BHA to VBA contract examiners, it had not developed a documented strategy and goals for the optimal allocation of exams between the two. We recommended that VA use sound planning practices such as developing goals, a timeline, and assessing risks related to planned workload allocations. VA drafted a plan, but it lacked key information such as the desired distribution of exams between VBA and VHA and an assessment of any associated risks. According to VA, they are working on an updated plan that will include this information. Our recent work highlights why sound planning and communication are important. Indeed, in our most recent review, we found that VHA medical facilities did not have a clear understanding of what was expected of them to meet exam demand in two areas. First, medical facilities were uncertain whether VHA would continue to provide exams in the future. We found that while VHA did have plans to continue providing exams, officials at the facilities responsible for recruiting and retaining examiners were unsure of those plans. They were uncertain whether they would need to maintain examiner capacity or if all exams would shift to VBA contractors. VHA has since communicated to facilities that they will continue to conduct exams and should develop plans to meet workload demands. Secondly, VHA has yet to provide clear guidance to its medical facilities on a legislative requirement to halt the elimination of examiner positions until the exam backlog is back to pre-pandemic levels. While VHA issued guidance to its facilities to halt changes to exam services and pause the elimination of examiner positions, the guidance lacked key details and definitions. As a result, facilities had different interpretations of the changes they could make. For example, one facility said they were not supposed to eliminate examiner positions in their organization chart, but they could leave these positions vacant as examiners retired or left. Another facility said the guidance left them leeway to continue moving away from conducting disability exams and prioritizing clinical care. We recommended that VHA clarify the guidance it provided to medical facilities to help them position them to meet veterans' exam needs. Now I'd like to turn to VA's use of two flexibilities that have helped the agencies to meet exam demand: license portability and telehealth. First, VBA has been using license portability to allow more types of providers to perform exams in states other than where they are licensed. While this flexibility has helped VBA to meet exam needs, we found the agency provided incorrect information to its vendors on who was eligible. For example, VBA mistakenly told contractors that dentists were eligible for license portability. VBA has since rectified these issues. VBA also did not adequately monitor the contractor's use of license portability and were unaware that non-eligible providers were being used. We recommended that VBA develop a way to regularly monitor vendors' use of portability. Since our report, the agency developed guidance for monitoring portability use. We also recommended that the VA assess any potential risks caused by ineligible providers conducting exams. The agency has not yet fully implemented this recommendation. Finally, both VBA contractors and VHA increased their use of telehealth during the pandemic, especially for mental health exams, and both continue to use this flexibility, citing several benefits such as more convenience for veterans who can't travel long distances and the ability to provide exams in difficult-to-reach areas. In summary, with the influx of exam requests and growing backlog, implementing our recommendations to plan for workload allocations, clearly communicate VHA exam capacity expectations to medical facilities, and conduct adequate oversight can help the agency to improve their capacity to serve our nation's veterans. This concludes my prepared statement, and I will be happy to address your questions.
Thank you, ma'am. The written statement of Ms. Curtis will be entered into the hearing record. Mr. Bracci, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your opening statement.
Thank you and good morning. Chairman Luttrell, Ranking Member Pappas, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the OIG's oversight of VBA's Contract Medical Exam Program, which is administered by its Medical Disability Examination Office, or MDEO. The OIG has maintained oversight of this program due to its effect on veterans' disability compensation benefits, as well as the billions of dollars VBA pays contractors to conduct these exams. I will highlight 3 OIG reviews showing gaps in MDEO's oversight of the program and describe how these weaknesses can affect veterans' experiences with the disability claims process. First, our 2022 comprehensive review of the Contract Medical Exam Program found significant deficiencies that stemmed in part from limitations with VBA's oversight at the time of the review. We found specific issues with governance, accountability, communication, and contract language. During our review, vendor exams did not consistently meet accuracy criteria, and contract wording restricted MDEO's ability to apply monetary disincentives to hold vendors accountable. Further, MDEO did not communicate errors it identified to VBA's Office of Field Operations or to its regional offices, which resulted in claims decisions based on erroneous or incomplete information. MDEO also did not analyze all readily available quality assurance data to help identify and correct systemic issues. We made 4 recommendations, including assessing and modifying contract language, communicating exam errors to all appropriate VBA offices, and analyzing available error data to help improve the program. All 4 recommendations are closed as implemented. Our most recent review responded to veterans' concerns that they had to travel excessive distances for exams. We examined MDEO's monitoring of contractual mileage requirements because this travel can place a physical burden on veterans and increase VA's costs since veterans receive mileage reimbursements for driving to their exams. Although the contractors are required to get veterans' express consent to travel beyond 50 miles for non-specialist exams and 100 miles for specialist exams, our team found that MDEO was not fulfilling its responsibility to monitor this requirement. MDEO's leaders did not consider it a priority given what they described as the small percentage of veterans affected. They did not realize the impact until our team informed them that over 65,000 veterans, or 11%, were required to travel beyond the mileage restrictions at the time of our review. The OIG made 3 recommendations that focused on VBA overseeing vendors' compliance with mileage and travel reimbursement requirements, as well as collaborating with vendors to ensure their portals include proper documentation of express consent and mileage reimbursement information. All recommendations will remain open until we see evidence of sustained progress. The 3rd review examined VBA's efforts to schedule and conduct disability exams during the pandemic. We found that VBA took significant actions to limit veterans' exposure to COVID-19 by canceling in-person exams and provided guidance to the field regarding when it was appropriate to reschedule exams to ensure cancellations did not result in claim denials. However, we found first that early in the pandemic, guidance was unclear and led to inappropriately denied claims due to canceled in-person exams, and second, that VBA's strategies for addressing the exam inventory required more attention and testing to ensure personnel are fully prepared for future emergencies. We made 2 recommendations to VBA: improve its strategy to reduce the exam inventory through in-person, telehealth, and acceptable clinical evidence exams, and implement a plan to increase the use of telehealth exams. We closed the first recommendation as implemented. The second recommendation was closed as not implemented because VBA did not carry out its original action plan due to changes in circumstances. In conclusion, one of the critical foundations of accountability of any program is effective quality assurance and monitoring to detect and resolve issues. MDEO needs to improve its oversight of contract exam vendors and better communicate with other VBA offices to ensure veterans receive the benefits they are entitled to through VA's disability programs. The OIG remains focused on conducting oversight work in this area to help improve veterans' experiences during the claims process. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement, and I would be happy to answer any questions you or members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Bracci. The written statement of Mr. Bracci will be entered into the hearing record. We will now move to questioning. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Bracci, how long have you been working at the Office of OIG?
Nearly 22 years.
Mr. London, how long have you been in your position?
Since December of 2021.
Have recommendations from your office, Mr. Bracci, are they similar to previous recommendations that you've offered up to the Department of Veterans Affairs? Do you see any consistency in the recommendations?
Yes, sir. Based on work we have done within VBA, we commonly see issues of governance, accountability, and communication.
So that seems systemic. And Mr. London, I'm curious, as a veteran myself, why this proverbial can continues to get kicked down the road. Can you give me some insight on why if the Office of Accountability is providing this information to the VA, why this continues to happen.
Thank you very much for the question. First, let me tell you that oversight and compliance is near and dear to my heart. Most of my time with the Department of Veterans Affairs, I spent my career making sure that we were in compliance with statute, regulations, and policies and procedures. So immediately after my appointment up to this position, I made a focus of making sure that, one, we have internal processes to review any deficiencies, and we take seriously the feedback that we get from GAO, from OIG, and veterans, VSOs, and their advocates. And as a result of my leadership and my team's actions, we have improved the oversight capabilities that we have, so the systemic issues that have been identified will not continue under my leadership. You have my commitment.
So I'll take that as the next time that this panel is sitting in front of us with the OIG report will not say governance, accountability, communications, and the continuance of language. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. London, on a staff call with the VA, the performance data of the vendors for the second quarter of the fiscal year 2023 was provided. The accuracy of veteran satisfactions of vendors seems to be above the requirements. However, the production standards do not seem to be meeting the requirements. Can you elaborate, please?
Yes, thank you for the question. I believe you're referring to quarter two of this fiscal year where the production rate was not meeting the standard. It's very important to note that quarter two actually represents exactly when VA started processing PACT Act claims. So from starting January 1st, we started to receive an influx of additional exam requests, which we expected and anticipated. And we have been working through that inventory. What we have subsequently done to make sure that we are meeting the demand of our veterans, we have changed the production requirement to match the receipts that we're getting and the projections that we have for exams. So the exam vendors are completing more exams than ever. As I noted in my testimony, we have completed over 25% more than we completed last year, which was a record year. And on a weekly basis, we complete over 50,000 exams. Generally, we get about 50,000 exams requested each week. So we are keeping pace with the demand, and it's a reflection of the new standards that we have, which have started in quarter three, which we'll be happy to report to you and your staff in the coming weeks.
I think one of the major concerns of this committee is the implementation of the PACT Act, and and I give absolute credit to you, to the Department of Veterans Affairs. Okay, I do. You guys are working hard. However, I shouldn't say however, my concern is because we're already behind the 8 ball, and the cases are going to continue to come in. Do you honestly think in the next fiscal year the VA will be able to sustain an upward momentum of completing these cases?
Thank you for the question. So our exam vendors continue to modernize their processes, to provide additional training, and to expand their network to make sure that they have the examiners available to meet the demand. And if you look at how we're performing today, on average, we complete exam requests within 30 days. And as I mentioned, we're completing over 50,000 exams each week. And so if you look at our current inventory that we have, which is roughly 285,000 pending exams, that represents the fact that we are processing these at 30 days at a time, and they're in various stages of the exam process. That can be scheduling the appointments with the veteran, actually completing appointments, or actually filling out the DBQ or going through a QA process. So I feel confident that where we are today and with our planned expansion, that we will be able to maintain a healthy inventory and to continue to provide exams so that veterans can get access to their benefits and health care.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. My time's expired. I now recognize the ranking member, Pappas, for his line of questioning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to our panel for your comments. And obviously, the chairman mentioned the increase in claims due to PACT Act and how VA is working to meet that moment, especially as the workload continues to escalate. And I'm just wondering if you talked a little bit, Mr. London, about the vendors, the other piece of the equation here, the VHA examiners. Can you talk about whether VHA facilities will hire additional examiners to increase staff capacity to help meet this moment and ensure that we don't fall further behind?
Thank you very much for the question. So as I mentioned in my testimony, the partnership with VHA is absolutely critical to make sure that we can complete the exam for our veterans. We meet with VHA on a weekly basis to discuss the state of the workload, and we are working, as stated in the testimony, to actually have a formal work allocation plan so that we have not only the confidence, but we have a common understanding of what the workload distribution is going to be. I'm going to defer to my colleague, Dr. Bridges, to talk specifically about what VHA is doing.
Okay, and while you answer that, if you could get to the point that I believe Ms. Curta made earlier, which was just about a lack of clarity within VA about what direction we're going in and whether or not we do want to fill positions and make sure VA is beefing up its staff of examiners.
Thank you for the question, Congressman. VHA is continuing work associated with the communications from the GAO needed to complete the recommendation and expect to meet the target date of November 2023. As Mr. London just stated, we are also working on a work allocation MOU, and we anticipate that to be completed by September 2023 and to be implemented by fiscal year 24. The decision for increasing capacity of VHA providers is left up to the local facilities and the business to make that decision based upon their, the workload for treatment exams as well as for C&P examiners. Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of seeing that formal workload plan, so we're all clear on where we're going, when do we expect to see that? I don't know, Mr. London, maybe if you want to take it.
Sure, I can take that. Thank you for the question. So as Dr. Bridges mentioned, we are actually working on the plan as we speak, and we plan to have it drafted by the end of the fiscal year. It will then go through VBA and VHA leadership concurrence, and obviously there will be a discussion there, and we plan to implement that in fiscal year 24. So I do not have a definitive timeline for the exact date that we will implement, but we will certainly have a draft ready for leadership by the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, so can you comment on what's happening in the interim? You know, to address this issue of lack of clarity and, you know, how VA is responding to this increase that we're seeing in folks that need these exams.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And first, let me explain that every exam that is requested, we first look to see if that local VHA facility closest to the veteran's home actually has the capacity to complete that examination. Every examination request goes through that process. So if the capacity is not at that local facility, that is when the exam request is then forwarded to one of the exam vendors. So as Dr. Bridges said, the first primary focus is to make sure that at the local level, they're providing the health care and treatment that our veterans have earned and that they deserve. And so if the capacity is not there, it then goes. So today, there are C&P examinations being completed by VHA, and as the chairman mentioned, VHA has completed about 10% of all exam requests.
Can I ask you just about maybe a philosophical question about timeliness and about quality, whether those things are in conflict and you need to work to balance them, or whether veterans can expect to see both through this process?
My view, thank you for the question. My view is that they are equally as important. We expect to complete exams as quickly as we can with the highest quality possible. That is why we set a target of 96% for all quality, and we will incentivize the vendors if they exceed that amount, and equally, if they go below 92%, we will actually charge a negative incentive to ensure that we are not only meeting the timeliness, but the quality that our veterans deserve.
Well, since such a growing share of this work is being contracted out, I think the accountability for the vendors is such an important piece of this. So measuring that progress is important. But even if you hit a score of 90, 95% in terms of timeliness or satisfaction, you're still talking about thousands of veterans that might not have a satisfactory experience, and these are people that are owed nothing but the best. So perfection is critically important in both of those areas. So I thank you for your work, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Mr. Subcommittee, you're recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the time, and thank you to the witnesses also for being here today. And as the subcommittee conducts this hearing oversight over the medical exam process for disability claims, I'm proud to represent over 70,000 veterans in my district in southeastern Arizona. It's CD6 in the southeastern corner of the state. And we have a substantial veteran population, and it's one, my community specifically in Sierra Vista, which is in Cochise County, has that substantial veteran population. And it's also right on the U.S.-Mexico border. But Cochise County also borders the state of New Mexico to the east, with the nearest VA facility in Tucson, which is an hour and a half away or so from the Sierra Vista area. So veterans in Sierra Vista face limited options if they can't schedule a medical exam. Additionally, most of the surrounding areas are rural communities with limited providers. In the Isaacson Rowe Veterans Healthcare and Benefits Act of 2020, it granted temporary license portability for BVA contracted nurse practitioners, physician assistants, and other healthcare providers that conduct disability exams to provide exams across state lines. This is crucial for communities like mine in Sierra Vista, with New Mexico being so close, as I mentioned. So, Mr. London, question for you. How have the flexibilities provided by license portability in telehealth exams helped the increased demand for disability exams?
Thank you for the question. Without that flexibility, I believe that we would not be able to keep pace and to report the numbers that I stated earlier about the increased production and how I feel confident that we're managing the exam request appropriately. The vendors have utilized that authority to actually have traveling providers to go to places like your state to ensure that veterans can get the exams that they need. We also have a fleet, the vendors do, have a fleet of mobile exam units. There are approximately 28, and as we speak, they're adding more to the fleet, where we're actually not only sending traveling providers, but we're actually going into the communities where veterans are. And we've actually started doing in-person events across the country where instead of having veterans to travel, we're going to them, especially in rural communities like the one that you serve. So I feel as though that particular authority has enabled us to be able to meet that demand and meet veterans where they are.
Well, you kind of answered my next question. If there's anything you want to expand on that, my follow-up was going to be, how do these flexibilities address the needs of rural veterans and ensuring they're able to receive quality and timely exams as well? As I mentioned, with, quite frankly, the state border lines with New Mexico being almost the same distance as the closest nearest facility. The mobile facility, if you go into them, that's an example. Anything else you can think of that is making this access better and wider for the veterans there?
Yes, thank you. It's a multi-pronged approach. So first, it's the traveling providers. Also, as I mentioned in my testimony, what the vendors are doing is, especially when there are large numbers of veterans that they need to see, they're actually leasing space in that area so they can have a routine presence there. They're also going in, and as demand comes up, they're actually working with local entities to actually utilize their space to, again, make sure that we can meet the demand. And again, that authority allows us the flexibility, even if we don't have providers in a particular area, to actually take advantage of utilizing our mobile units, using that rented space or that per diem space. And we also want to make sure that we are using telehealth capabilities and also the acceptable clinical evidence so that veterans do not have to travel at all.
I'm not sure how good your glasses are, but it seems like you're reading my notes, because that was exactly my next question. And actually, that's going to go to Ms. Curta, if I can, regarding telehealth. Can you elaborate a little bit on how the flexibilities of license portability and telehealth reportedly helped the VA to meet demand on disability exams?
Sure. I have very similar things to say as VA. We've heard from the contractors we spoke to, and certainly veteran service organizations, as well as VA officials, are pretty much in agreement that these flexibilities have helped meet exam demand in a number of ways. They've helped provide exams in rural areas, as we discussed. In addition, they've also broadened the pool of available providers, which we heard helped increase access to specialists, for example, audiologists and psychologists. Contract vendors were also able to send in experienced examiners from out of state to provide exams rather than needing to take the time to hire and train new providers. And finally, in addition to helping provide exams for rural veterans, we also heard that telehealth helped provide safer exams during the pandemic, saved some veterans time from traveling long distances, and eased physical space constraints experienced by VHA and vendor facilities so they could complete more exams.
Thank you. I'm out of time. I just want to say that we realize that we need to clarify some technical issues here and guidelines regarding the license portability. But I also believe that many communities like mine can benefit from this. While I realize the temporary license portability is scheduled to expire here in January of 2024, I hope we can work together to ensure that veterans can continue to benefit from easier access to these exams, especially when it's so crucial to their disability claims and disability ratings as well. So thank you, and Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, sir. Mr. DeLuzio, you're recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank to you and the ranking member for your leadership here. We've got to get this right. We've got to make sure that we're protecting public money and, of course, making sure our fellow veterans aren't missed when they're eligible to be receiving compensation and care in the VA. So it's critical. Mr. Bracci, I'll start with you. I want to interrogate a bit the assumptions around outsourcing and privatizing the C&P exams and make sure that those make sense. As I understand it, principally, or first, the hope here, the goal is to save money without sacrificing quality and to free up VHA staff and personnel for care. Let's start with the first one. Are we saving money without sacrificing quality and outsourcing these exams?
As far as who conducts the exams, the OIG doesn't really take a position on who conducts them. We've just conducted our oversight of contract exams because that's where the bulk of the exams are done and that's where the bulk of the money is spent. We haven't done any specific review to the topic that you're talking about.
Sure. So in other words, reviewing or comparing outcomes in VHA relative to the contractors who are doing these exams outside VHA.
Yes, sir. We have not done any reviews that focus on that aspect.
Okay. Is there anything stopping you from doing that kind of analysis in terms of legislative authority or otherwise?
No, nothing legislatively that's preventing us from doing it.
Then I guess I'll ask you as well, Mr. Bracchi, does OIG have a view of whether using contract examiners has freed up VHA to use people and their time for care more effectively?
I don't think we've done the work to make that type of assessment. We've focused on MDEO's oversight of the contract exam program. Okay. And that's where we get into the issues of governance, accountability, and communication.
Okay. So then I'll ask you a version of those same questions. Do you have a view of whether this has been more effective financially without sacrificing quality to have so many of the exams be done by contractors?
I do not have reviewed it because I'm not aware of any analysis that's been conducted to actually have a conclusion to answer your question, but I thank you for the question.
Does anyone on the panel have a thought about that? Okay. Something we need to be digging in on. That's the basic assumption, I think, of why we are doing these, or why we are having contractors do these rather than folks within VHA. And Dr. Bridges, do you have a view of whether the reliance on contractors has freed up VHA staff to do more and provide more care relative to what they were doing previously?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that question that you're posing, but I can take it back to leadership.
Please do. Does anyone else have a thought on that or have any view on that at all? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Mr. Bracchi, back to you. Your testimony highlighted issues with the distance veterans are being asked to travel for their exams. And you mentioned in your testimony here today, your team found on average veterans were asked to travel 93 miles more than the contract limitations, which are, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, 50 miles for non-specialist, 100 miles for specialist each way. What percent, and I think you mentioned it earlier, what percent do you estimate of all veterans are being forced to travel beyond the contractual limitations on these exams?
Yes. So at the time of our review, it was about 11% who were having to travel beyond the mileage restrictions, and that amounted to about 65,000 veterans.
And your findings were that MDEO was not exercising really any oversight of the contract examiners in terms of how far they were asking veterans to travel?
Yes, the oversight was lacking as far as that particular topic. Once, to their credit, once we came in and we did our review and we identified issues and made recommendations, they were responsive and started to take action.
And does OIG have a sense of whether we're now seeing veterans traveling within the limitations in the contracts and those geographic ranges, or we're still seeing folks have to travel too far?
We're just now getting into our follow-up process, which starts about 90 days after report publication, so we'll be tracking that as we go through that follow-up process.
Okay. Mr. London, last question, as I almost run out of time. If a veteran has a sensitive issue like military sexual trauma where they would want to see an examiner within the VA, are they able to request and receive that type of exam?
Yes, thank you for the question. Veterans are afforded their preference of the gender of the examiner for military sexual trauma-related claims.
I wasn't asking about gender. I'm asking whether they can ask for someone within the VA to do that exam who might have more specialized experience with veterans and military sexual trauma rather than a contract examiner.
Thank you for the clarification. So as I mentioned earlier, every exam, regardless of exam type, we first look to see if the local VHA facility has the capacity to complete that. So as it relates to a military sexual trauma-related claim, if the availability is not there and the veteran reaches out to VA, we will do everything in our power to accommodate the veteran's request.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'm out of time. Thank you. I yield back.
Thanks, sir. Mr. McGarvey, you recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing as we focus on making sure that our vets are getting the care they need. Little concerned with what we just heard right now from Mr. DeLuzio's questions. There's no position taken on who is giving these exams and how they're doing, that there's no sort of monitoring of what's going on. When in the conclusion of the statement, Mr. Brockie, that you offered to the committee, it says the OIG has found that MDEO needs to improve its quality assurance processes and better monitor its contract exam vendors to help ensure veterans receive the benefits they are entitled to through the VA's disability programs. When we talk to our vets in our districts, what do we tell them? You guys know there's a problem, and right now there's seemingly no answers on what we're going to do about it. What should we tell our vets back home that you guys are planning to do to make it so that they can get the benefits they have earned and they're entitled to?
Thank you for the question. May I respond?
Please.
So I would not characterize it that we are not monitoring the quality of examinations that are going to be completed under the contract. We review approximately 1,500 quality exams every single month and almost 17,000 annually. As I reported earlier, quality is currently at 97%. OIG identified that we had an opportunity to improve our communication, which we have done. So on a monthly basis, we send our quality errors to the Office of Field Operations that work with the claims processors at each regional office to ensure that any errors that we identify does not negatively impact the veterans' access to benefits. So I would characterize that we have a strong program and we have adequate oversight and we're communicating information and we see improvement each and every month.
And I'm glad for that. I mean, again, we want our vets to get the care they need. I think everybody on this panel wants our vets to get the care they need. We're appreciative of the work that is being done to help take care of our veterans, but obviously we want that work to be the best. And, you know, so one of the things we're talking about 97%, we're talking about these numbers. There's still an incredible backlog. So, I mean, I understand why we're needing contractors. We want to make sure those contractors are doing a good job and addressing the backlog that exists because, you know, right now the current number of CMP exams outstanding is 300,000. And I know that there's some COVID concerns. It's still over 250,000 backlogged exams, but COVID alone doesn't explain the backlog because prior to the pandemic, the backlog was about 160,000. So these issues have been a long-standing area of concern. So we've got to get the backlog. We want to make sure that in getting the backlog, the veterans are having quality exams done by these contractors. So you know, what can we do to help? What can Congress do to help this backlog? What resources do you need? What legislative changes do you guys recommend, if any, that we can help with?
Thank you very much for the question. I go back to one example is License Portability Authority. First, renewing that authority or making it permanent as VA requested, and also giving VA the authority to expand the types of providers that can utilize that authority. I believe that will allow us to make extreme inroads on the already excellent progress that we're making in completing exams on average in 30 days.
I appreciate that. And so just one last question, because we're getting short on time. Would putting certain VA clinicians who are VHA employees on the VBA payroll change the VHA's hesitancy of assigning clinicians to perform the CMP exams?
Thank you for the question. I'll defer that question to my VHA colleague, Dr. Bridges.
Can you repeat the question for me?
Sure. Would putting certain VA clinicians who are VHA employees on the VBA payroll change the VHA's hesitancy of assigning clinicians to perform these CMP exams, helping with the backlog?
I don't think I have a good answer for you on that question. I will have to take that one back to leadership for an
Thank
answer.
you. Please do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Self, you're now recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. London, how many GAO recommendations have not been implemented across, let's just stick with VBA.
Across VBA, not just my office?
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. I just wanted to clarify. We'll have to take that back and get back to you. I don't have that number offhand.
Yeah, from the macro perspective, across VA as a whole, it's in the hundreds. That's from the macro. So, Mr. Bracci, am I getting that right?
Yes, sir.
I've heard the incentives that the providers, that the contractors have. Do you have any monetary penalties should they not meet the standards?
I know within the new contracts that were written, they have the option of providing monetary incentives and monetary disincentives in order to hold vendors accountable, but I think that question can be better answered by Mr. London and his team.
Mr. London?
Yes, thank you for the question. For each of the 5 performance elements that we have, quality, customer service, timeliness, average days that an exam request is pending, and average days to complete an exam request, all of those particular performance measures are eligible for both incentives and negative incentives.
And how often do you exercise the penalties?
Thank you.
Disincentives, as you call them.
Yes, thank you for the follow-up question. As Mr. Bracci mentioned, we just recently changed the contract to be able to specifically address quality and customer service. Before, we didn't have elements to do those. However, before, we focused on production and timeliness, and we have assessed negative incentives exceeding $26 million.
Okay, that's good to hear, because my experience, as short as it is in Congress, the administration responds primarily to money. So I want to talk about the density of your contract examiners, because as we talk about time it takes, Mr. Bracci, I think I'm back to you. The time it takes for veterans to get to an exam, do we have the density of contract examiners that we need, or is this, are they located primarily in urban areas? Talk to me about the rural areas.
Yes, sir. As far as questions of resources and process, I think Mr. London would better answer that.
Thank you for the question. So if you look at where VA facilities are located, and you look at where the contractors either have their branded locations or they have partnerships with third-party examiners, we are exactly where VHA facilities are. And we also have density into some rural areas as well. As I mentioned before, we utilize the License Portability Authority to have traveling providers to go to those communities. We also have mobile units that go there. So from a density standpoint, we are located where large populations of veterans reside, and for those areas where veterans are in rural communities, we're doing everything we can to go to where they are so they do not have to travel long distances.
I know that broadband is an issue in some rural areas, including part of my district. Does the lack of broadband hinder your telemedicine attempt?
And thank you for the question. In some limited situations, I have heard of circumstances where the veteran either does not have the equipment or the access to broadband. As far as the equipment, the vendors do have the capability to actually send equipment to the veteran so they can participate in a telehealth exam. As far as the broadband availability, there are unfortunately situations where I know veterans do not have access to that capability.
So how often do you send equipment to them to use? That's interesting.
Yeah, thank you for the question. That's at the veteran's request. I'll have to take that back to give you definitive numbers, but I do know that that capability is being used across our vendor network.
I would like to get that answer. That's very good. Okay, my time is up, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Self. To the panel, we have the ranking member and I have a few more questions for you. I recognize the ranking member, sir. I'm all set. You're good? Okay. Well, I have a question. Mr. London, pre-hearing brief with the staff mentioned that the total cost for the contract programs, including exams, salaries, and reimbursement for OIT, among other things, was roughly $2.3 billion last fiscal year, but not all was used. How much was left over?
Thank you very much for the question. I do not have the direct number that's left over, so I'll be sure to come back to you because we actually have that number still available because we have not de-obligated those funds because there are still invoices that are being processed from last fiscal year.
So the remaining funds will be utilized where we sent them initially?
That's correct, and any unused funds will be de-obligated and sent back to Treasury.
Okay. Mr. Bracci, when you finish your report, who is the first person you send that to inside the department? A name. I want a name.
There's a group within VBA who we
Nope, somebody's in charge. One person. Who is it?
Our report and recommendations go directly to the Undersecretary for Benefits. It goes through an office, but
Remind me who that is, please.
Mr. Jacobs.
Mr. Jacobs. Well, I know who that is. All right, thank you. Ms. Curda, on your report, once it's completed and you send it out, who does that go to directly?
Our recommendations are directed to whoever is most directly responsible for implementing them. So in the case of our most recent report, it was the Secretary of the VA, McDonough.
Was Mr. McDonough?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bowden, how are you today?
Good, thank you.
I just wanted you on the record so everybody knew that you were here.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. I want to thank you all for appearing today to discuss this important issue. Disability exams are an important part of our disability claims process and ensuring veterans receive their earned benefits. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you come in. You're recognized.
Good,
5 minutes.
thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Mr. Chair, and it'll be quick. I don't want to be that guy that holds everybody else up. So let me just, I did have a couple more questions here, and I'll start with you, Mr. London, again. On the issue of license portability, what other providers can we expand the license portability to?
Thank you very much for the question. So first, I'll give you two examples cited in GAO's report. Dentists, for example, and ophthalmologists. Those are two examples of providers that currently do not have the authority that a further expansion will allow us to serve more veterans.
Good. That's really what I had for you, sir. And then, again, Ms. Curda, real quick, on the GAO reported that the VBA contracted examiners who were ineligible for license portability conducted exams in states other than they were licensed to do that. Has the VA reviewed how many exams were incorrectly conducted under license portability? And if so, what did the VA find on that? Just in terms of the accountability also that Mr. McGarvey was talking about.
I'm not aware that they have completed that assessment. That was one of our outstanding recommendations, is that they do a thorough assessment of the ineligible examiners, and also from a risk perspective to determine if anything needs to be done with regarding the claims that were decided. So I would just refer back to Mr. London to address their progress on that.
Thank you for the question. We have conducted a more formal risk assessment. We did do an initial assessment and provided that information to GAO when they issued their report. And we have since done a deeper dive, and we've consulted with the Office of General Counsel. And specific to your question, in the spirit of transparency, we did identify that approximately 300 veterans were impacted by the use of dentists and optometrists. So again, that analysis has been completed. We have made recommendations to leadership, and so that recommendation is being finalized, and we will share that information in the next coming weeks with GAO.
I'm interested in getting a copy of that as well, please, and what's being rectified and what are the next steps to prevent that from happening again.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, sir. I yield to the ranking member for his closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our panel for your comments here today, and I want to thank you for joining this conversation on VA's C&P exam processes. It's clear that there's more work to do to ensure that veterans receive the exams in a timely fashion and in a convenient manner, and that the reports of those exams are complete and accurate. It's critical to these veterans that they receive the benefits that they deserve for medical issues related to their military service, and we certainly owe them nothing less. The exam process is a key cog in the machinery that results in them receiving that benefit. So I look forward to partnering with you all and you, Mr. Chairman, and the contractors and VSOs to ensure that our veterans receive the care and benefits that they deserve and that this process is working for them. I certainly continue to challenge our witnesses and the contractors that are tasked by VA to do these exams to keep rededicating yourself to improving this experience for veterans. Because again, we hear feedback from time to time that is not positive. We work to help veterans who have frustrations with these experiences. And we can celebrate statistics, but we have to recognize that there are individual veterans behind these statistics, and it is not always working in an optimal fashion for them. So timeliness and quality matter. We can get both of those right and continue to improve. And so does the treatment of veterans in the scheduling process as well, which can be a pain point for them in terms of getting that time and location right, and just the customer service that they receive from these contractors and from VA. So, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. I thank you for holding this hearing.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ranking Member. To mimic what the Ranking Member just said, in all your successes, it is our job, if one of our veteran constituents has an issue, we're going to bring it to you until it's perfect. With that, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material without objection. So ordered. This hearing is adjourned.